Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't. The crimson sun bled across the horizon of Xylos, casting long, skeletal shadows from the rusted husks of forgotten machinery. Jax coughed, pulling his rebreather tighter against the acrid dust that swirled through the air. He hated Xylos. 10 years he'd been scraping a living on this forsaken rock, sifting through the wreckage of the corporate wars. 10 years of breathing recycled air and eating protein paste, all for the promise of striking it rich. A promise that had remained stubbornly unfulfilled. His boots crunched on shattered plasteel as he made his way through the graveyard of transport freighters. A scavenger's paradise, if you were willing to risk radiation burns and the occasional territorial sandworm. Today, he was hunting for a specific part, a class 4 gravitic stabilizer, essential for repairing his aging freighter, the rusty nail. Without it, he was grounded, and grounded on Xylos was a death sentence. Jax adjusted his goggles, the augmented reality display highlighting potential salvage points. He'd been tracking a faint energy signature for the past few hours, hoping it would lead him to his prize. The signal grew stronger as he rounded a colossal, half-buried engine block. There, amidst the debris, was a deactivated transport pod, its hull scarred and blackened. Jackpot, Jax muttered, his spirits lifting for the first time in weeks. Transport pods were often equipped with high-grade stabilizers. He approached cautiously, his pulse rifle raised. You never knew what you'd find lurking around these derelicts. Pirates, mutated creatures, rogue security drones, Xylos had it all. He activated his cutting torch, the hiss of the plasma blade echoing in the desolate landscape. He sliced through the pod's access panel, the metal groaning in protest. As the panel swung open, a wave of stale air washed over him, carrying the faint scent of ozone and something else, something sickly sweet. Jax peered inside, his breath catching in his throat. The pod was mostly empty, filled with discarded cables and broken equipment. But in the far corner, slumped against the wall, was a figure. He initially thought it was a mannequin, some kind of training dummy. But as he got closer, he realized it was something far more disturbing. It was a female, humanoid but distinctly alien. Her skin was a pale, almost luminous blue, and her head was shaved, revealing intricate cybernetic implants that pulsed with a faint, internal light. Wires snaked across her body, disappearing beneath a tattered jumpsuit. Her eyes were closed, and she was unnervingly still. Jax lowered his rifle, his scavenger's instinct kicking in. She was clearly high-tech, likely an expensive model. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble creating her, and then just dumped her here. It didn't make sense. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering over her arm. Hesitantly, he touched her skin. It was cold, clammy. He checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. She was alive. Well, shit, Jax muttered. This complicated things. He wasn't a medic, he was a scrapper. He was supposed to be finding parts, not rescuing damsels in distress, especially not alien ones. But he couldn't just leave her here to die. Xylos was a harsh mistress, and she wouldn't last long exposed to the elements. He ran a diagnostic scan with his wrist-mounted computer. The results scrolled across the screen, a jumble of technical jargon he barely understood. But one line stood out: critical system failure. Neural degradation imminent. Great. Not only was she an unconscious alien, but she was also actively dying. Jack sighed. He was a sucker for lost causes. All right, Blue, he said, hefting her into his arms. She was surprisingly light. Let's see if we can't get you patched up. But you're paying for the medkit, got it? He carried her back to the rusty nail, his mind racing. He had no idea who she was, where she came from, or why she had been abandoned on Xylos. But he knew one thing: his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. The rusty nail was a patchwork of salvaged parts and jury-rigged systems, held together by duct tape and sheer willpower. Jax's living quarters were cramped and cluttered, filled with spare parts, tools, and half-eaten ration packs. He cleared a space on his bunk and gently laid the alien woman down. He rummaged through his medical kit, pulling out a diagnostic scanner and a vial of nutrient paste. He ran the scanner over her body, the device beeping and whirring as it analyzed her systems. The news wasn't good. Her neural implants were failing, causing widespread system malfunctions. She was suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. And, according to the scanner, she had been subjected to extensive neural reprogramming. "Someone really did a number on you," Jax muttered. He injected her with the nutrient paste, hoping it would stabilize her long enough for him to figure out what to do next. He needed to get her to a proper medical facility, but the nearest one was on Port Azure, a 2-day flight away. And without the gravitic stabilizer, the rusty nail wasn't going anywhere. He sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Her face was serene, almost peaceful, despite the trauma she had clearly endured. He wondered about her story, about the life she had led before she ended up as a discarded asset on a wasteland planet. As if in answer to his thoughts, her eyes fluttered open. They were a striking shade of violet, filled with confusion and pain. She stared up at him, her gaze unfocused. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're safe," Jax said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're on my ship. I found you in a transport pod out in the junkyard." Her eyes widened, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "The pod. I remember." She trailed off, her brow furrowing in concentration. They left me." "Who left you?" Jax asked gently. She shook her head, wincing in pain. I don't know. My memories, they're fragmented." Jax sighed. Amnesia. Just what he needed. "All right," he said. "Don't worry about that now. Just rest. You've been through a lot." He stood up, intending to leave her to sleep, but she reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait," she said, her voice urgent. "You have to help me. There's something important. I need to remember." Jax looked down at her, his expression softening. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing herself completely. He knew what it was like to lose your past, to feel like a ghost in your own life. "I'll help you," he said. "But you have to trust me." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think I can trust you." "Good," Jax said. "Then let's start with a name. Do you remember your name?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. A moment later, she opened them again, her gaze clear and focused. "Lyra," she said. "My name is Lyra." Jax smiled. "All right, Lyra," he said. "Welcome aboard the Rusty Nail. Let's see if we can't get—" The interior of the Rusty Nail was even more cramped than Lyra had imagined. Jax, despite his gruff exterior, had been surprisingly attentive, brewing her a weak tea substitute and rigging up a makeshift foredrip to replenish her depleted electrolytes. The ship smelled of engine grease, recycled air, and a faint, underlying sweetness that she couldn't quite place. "So," Jax said, leaning against the doorway of his tiny galley, "you said you needed to remember something. What is it? And why is it so important?" Lyra sat on the edge of the bunk, her violet eyes fixed on the flickering holographic display that served as Jax's main computer. She felt fragile. Her body was weak, her memories fragmented, and her mind was a chaotic jumble of emotions and sensations she couldn't quite process. I don't know exactly," she said, her voice still raspy. "But it's knowledge. Something valuable. Something that someone wants to keep hidden." "Someone like who?" Jax pressed. I don't know. Lyra snapped, frustration creeping into her voice. That's the problem. It's like a locked door in my mind. I can feel it there, but I can't open it. Jax scratched his chin, his eyes narrowed in thought. All right, he said. Let's try a different approach. What's the last thing you remember before waking up in that transport pod? Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the swirling images in her mind. I was on a ship. A large ship. There were experiments. Pain. They were trying to erase something. Reprogram me. Reprogram you for what? I don't know. Lyra repeated, her voice rising in pitch. It's all blurred. Like a dream. Or a nightmare. Jax held up his hand, signaling her to calm down. Okay. Easy. We'll figure this out. We just need to find someone who knows more about these implants of yours. Do you know someone? Lyra asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Jax hesitated. Maybe. There's a contact I used to work with on Port Azure. Name's Zara. She's resourceful. Knows her way around the black market. If anyone can decipher those implants, it's her. Then we need to go to Port Azure, Lyra said, her voice firm. Hold on, Jax said, holding up his hand. Port Azure is not exactly a vacation spot. It's a hive of scum and villainy. And it's crawling with corporate security and bounty hunters. If someone's looking for you, they'll be looking there. I don't care, Lyra said. I need to know what's inside my head. And I'm willing to risk whatever it takes to find out. Jack stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. Someone who was willing to gamble everything for a chance at redemption. He had seen that look in the mirror more than once. All right, he said finally. We're going to Port Azure. But we're doing it my way. I know a few back routes and hidden passages that might keep us off the radar. And you're going to have to trust me. I'm trusting you now, aren't I? Lyra said, raising an eyebrow. Jack smirked. You have no idea. Getting the rusty nail spaceworthy was a challenge. The Class 4 gravitic stabilizer was proving elusive, and Jax had to resort to some creative, and highly illegal, scavenging to find a suitable replacement. Lyra, despite her weakened state, proved surprisingly helpful. Her knowledge of advanced technology was impressive, and she was able to diagnose and repair several critical systems that Jax had been struggling with for years. You're a natural, Jax said, watching her work on a recalcitrant power conduit. Maybe you should consider a career in spaceship repair. Lyra smiled faintly. Maybe, she said. If I ever figure out what I want to do with my life. After 2 days of frantic repairs, the rusty nail was finally ready to fly. Jax plotted a course for Port Azure, taking a circuitous route through asteroid fields and nebulae to avoid detection. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but Lyra didn't complain. She spent most of her time studying the ship's systems, absorbing information like a sponge. As they approached Port Azure, Jax briefed Lyra on what to expect. Port Azure is a free port, he said. No questions asked, no regulations enforced. It's a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, and anyone else who wants to stay off the grid. The local law enforcement is corrupt and ineffective. So, we're on our own. What about Zara? Lyra asked. Can we trust her? Jax hesitated. Zara is complicated. She's loyal, in her own way. But she's also ambitious and opportunistic. She'll help us, but she'll expect something in return. What kind of something? Information, Jax said. Credits. Favors. Whatever she thinks she can get away with. Lyra nodded. I understand. We'll be careful. Port Azure was a sprawling space station, a chaotic jumble of docking bays, markets, and entertainment districts. The air was thick with the smell of exotic spices, exhaust fumes, and cheap liquor. The streets were crowded with aliens of all shapes and sizes, hawking their wares, gambling, and engaging in various illicit activities. Jax guided the Rusty Nail to a secluded docking bay on the station's outer rim. The area was dimly lit and sparsely populated, a haven for shady deals and clandestine meetings. "All right," Jax said, as the ship settled into the docking clamps. "Stay close to me. And keep your hand on your blaster. We don't want any trouble." They disembarked the Rusty Nail and stepped into the bustling marketplace. Lyra was immediately overwhelmed by the sights, sounds, and smells of Port Azure. It was a sensory overload, a far cry from the sterile environments she remembered from her past. Jax led her through the crowded streets, navigating the throngs of people with practiced ease. He seemed to know every back alley and hidden doorway, every shortcut and secret passage. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, struggling to keep up with his pace. "To see Zara," Jax said. "She has a shop in the Undercity. It's not exactly the Ritz, but it's safe." The Undercity was a labyrinthine network of tunnels and chambers beneath the main station. It was a lawless place, ruled by gangs and criminal syndicates. The air was thick with the stench of decay and despair. As they descended into the Undercity, Lyra felt a sense of foreboding. She knew that they were entering a dangerous world, a world where trust was a rare and valuable commodity. They reached Zara's shop, a small, nondescript storefront tucked away in a dark corner of the Undercity. The sign above the door read, "Zara's Emporium of Rare and Unusual Artifacts." Jax pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The shop was dimly lit and cluttered with shelves overflowing with strange and exotic objects. Ancient weapons, alien artifacts, and strange technological devices were crammed into every available space. Behind the counter stood a woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. She was tall and slender, with a sharp, intelligent face. She was dressed in a sleek, black bodysuit that accentuated her curves. "Jax," she said, her voice cool and professional. "What a pleasant surprise. I haven't seen you in ages. What brings you to my humble establishment?" "Zara," Jax said, returning her gaze. "I need your help." Zara raised an eyebrow, her eyes flicking to Lyra. "And who is this?" "This is Lyra," Jax said. "She needs someone to decipher her neural implants." Zara studied Lyra for a long moment, her gaze intense and probing. "Interesting," she said finally. "Very interesting. I've heard rumors of experimental implants like these. Cutting-edge technology. And highly illegal. Can you help her?" Jax asked. Zara smiled, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Perhaps," she said. "But first, we need to discuss payment." Jax sighed. He had expected as much. "What do you want, Zara?" "Information," Zara said. "I want to know everything about Lyra. Who she is, where she came from, and why she has those implants." Jax hesitated. He wasn't sure how much he could trust Zara. But he knew that Lyra needed her help. "All right," he said finally. "I'll tell you everything. But you have to promise to help Lyra." Zara nodded, her eyes fixed on Lyra. "I promise," she said. "I'm always happy to help a damsel in distress. Especially when she's carrying around valuable secrets." Lyra stepped forward, her violet eyes meeting Zara's green ones. "Then let's get started," she said. "I'm tired of being in the dark." Zara smiled. "As you wish," she said. "Follow me." She led them through a hidden door behind the counter, into a small, windowless laboratory. The room was filled with sophisticated technological equipment, humming and whirring with power. "This is where the magic happens," Zara said, gesturing to a large, holographic scanner. Let's see what secrets your little brain is hiding. Lyra lay down on the scanner bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She was about to delve into the depths of her mind, to confront the ghosts of her past. She had no idea what she would find. But she knew that she had to do it. For herself. And for the chance to finally claim a future of her own. The holographic scanner hummed, casting an eerie blue glow across Lyra's face. Zara manipulated the controls, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Jack stood beside her, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of Lyra's neural implants. Fascinating, Zara murmured, her eyes glued to the screen. I've never seen anything quite like this. The architecture is incredibly advanced, almost organic. What does it mean? Lyra asked, her voice tight with anticipation. It means someone went to a lot of trouble to mess with your head, Zara said. These implants are designed to both enhance and suppress certain cognitive functions. They're like a lockbox, keeping certain memories and abilities hidden away. Can you unlock them? Lyra asked. Zara shrugged. Maybe. The encryption is complex, but not impenetrable. The real question is, what are we going to find when we open it? I need to know, Lyra said. No matter what it is. Zara nodded. All right. Let's see what we can do. She initiated the decryption sequence, the scanner whirring and clicking as it began to break through the implant's defenses. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing fragmented images and distorted data streams. I'm getting something, Zara said, her voice strained. But it's corrupted. Like a damaged file. Keep going, Lyra urged. There has to be something there. Zara pressed on, pushing the scanner to its limits. The air crackled with energy, and the smell of ozone filled the laboratory. Suddenly, the holographic display went blank. Damn it! Zara exclaimed, slamming her fist on the console. I overloaded the system. The decryption failed. Lyra sat up, her face pale with disappointment. What does that mean? It means we're going to have to try a different approach, Zara said. This system isn't powerful enough. We need something older. Something more specialized. Like what? Jax asked. Like a neural archive, Zara said. They were used by the old corporate rulers to store and process vast amounts of data. Most of them were destroyed during the corporate wars, but there's a rumor of one that's still intact. Hidden away in an abandoned research facility outside the city. That sounds like a trap, Jack said, his eyes narrowing. It might be, Zara said. But it's the only chance we have. If we want to unlock Lyra's memories, we need to go there. Lyra didn't hesitate. Let's go, she said. The abandoned research facility was located in a desolate industrial zone on the outskirts of Port Azure. The area was a wasteland of crumbling factories, rusted pipelines, and toxic waste dumps. The air was thick with pollution and the stench of decay. Jax drove them there in a battered hover car he had acquired from a local fence. The vehicle rattled and sputtered as they navigated the pothole-filled roads, the landscape blurring past in a haze of grime and smog. This place gives me the creeps, Jack said, glancing around at the derelict buildings. I have a bad feeling about this. We don't have a choice, Lyra said, her voice resolute. This is the only way. They reached the research facility, a towering concrete structure that loomed over the surrounding landscape like a tombstone. The building was scarred and blackened, riddled with bullet holes and scorch marks. The entrance was sealed with a reinforced blast door, guarded by a pair of deactivated security turrets. Nice welcoming committee, Jax muttered, pulling out his cutting torch. Let's see if we can't get this door open. He sliced through the blast door, the metal screaming in protest. As the door swung open, a gust of stale, musty air rushed out, carrying the scent of chemicals and death. They stepped inside, their weapons raised. The interior of the facility was dark and silent, a labyrinth of corridors and laboratories. The walls were covered with graffiti and the floors were littered with debris. The air was heavy with a sense of decay and abandonment. "Stay close," Jack said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "And watch your backs. We don't know what's lurking in here." They moved cautiously through the facility, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They passed through deserted laboratories, filled with broken equipment and discarded experiments. They saw evidence of past violence, bloodstains on the walls and spent shell casings on the floor. As they delved deeper into the facility, Lyra began to experience strange sensations. Flashes of images flickered through her mind, fragments of memories that were not her own. She saw scientists in white coats, conducting experiments on helpless subjects. She heard screams of pain and cries of despair. "What's wrong?" Jax asked, noticing her distress. I think I'm remembering something," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "This place, it feels familiar. I think I've been here before." "Before what?" Jax pressed. "Before, the reprogramming," Lyra said. "Before they erased my memories." Jax exchanged a worried glance with Zara. This was getting complicated. They reached the central research chamber, a large, circular room dominated by a massive computer console. The Neural Archive. It was a relic of a bygone era, a hulking machine of metal and wires. But it was still intact, its lights blinking and its fans whirring softly. "This is it," Zara said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. The key to unlocking Lyra's past. She approached the console and began to interface with the system. The holographic display flickered to life, showing lines of code and diagnostic readouts. "All right," Zara said. "Let's see if we can get this old girl running." As Zara worked on the console, Lyra wandered around the chamber, her gaze fixed on the walls. She felt a strange pull, a sense of connection to this place. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, the whispers of the scientists and the cries of the victims. Suddenly, she stopped in front of a large, metal door. The door was sealed with a heavy lock and a warning sign, "Restricted Access. Biohazard Containment." Lyra reached out and touched the door, her fingers tracing the contours of the metal. A jolt of electricity shot through her body, and a flood of images surged through her mind. She saw herself, younger and more vibrant, standing in this very room. She was wearing a white lab coat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was surrounded by scientists, all of them looking at her with a mixture of awe and fear. "She's stable," one of the scientists said. "The neural integration is complete. She's ready for the next phase." "Excellent," another scientist said. "Prepare the subject for memory implantation." Lyra recoiled from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what they were talking about. She had been one of them. A scientist. A researcher. She had been working on this project, this terrible experiment. "Lyra." Jax called out, his voice urgent. "Get away from that door." Lyra turned to see Jax and Zara staring at her with alarm. The Neural Archive was humming, its lights flashing erratically. The air was crackling with energy. "Something's happening," Zara said, her voice strained. "The system is overloading. I can't control it." Suddenly, the lights went out. The chamber plunged into darkness. A loud, piercing alarm began to blare. "We have to get out of here," Jax shouted. But it was too late. The ground began to shake. The walls began to crumble. The research facility was coming apart at the seams. As the building collapsed around them, Lyra knew that she had unleashed something terrible. Something that had been buried for years. Something that would change her life forever. Flashback sequence, Lyra's memory. A sterile white lab. Rexus, a stern-faced scientist with cold eyes, observes young Lyra. Rexus, Lyra, you are the key to unlocking humanity's potential. Your mind is a vessel, ready to receive the knowledge that will elevate us above the stars. Lyra, eager and idealistic, smiles. Lyra, I won't fail you, father. Images flash, Lyra working tirelessly, connecting her mind to alien artifacts, deciphering complex equations. She is brilliant, driven, but increasingly troubled. Lyra, to Rexus, are we sure this is ethical? The subjects, they're suffering. Rexus, progress requires sacrifice, Lyra. Do not let sentimentality cloud your judgment. The experiments become more brutal. Lyra witnesses horrific procedures, her conscience screaming in protest. Lyra, confronting Rexus, this isn't science, it's torture. I can't be a part of this anymore. Rexus's expression hardens. His love turns to cold calculation. Rexus, you've become a liability, Lyra. Your sentimentality is a disease. But don't worry, I have a cure. Lyra is strapped to a table, her mind assaulted by waves of energy. Rexus watches, emotionless, as her memories are erased. Rexus, you were a promising experiment, Lyra. A pity you couldn't see the bigger picture. The flashback ends, leaving Lyra gasping for breath, her mind reeling from the horror she has witnessed. As the dust settled, Lyra, Jax, and Zara found themselves standing amidst the ruins of the research facility. They were battered and bruised, but alive. What was that? Jax asked, his voice shaken. I don't know, Lyra said, her mind still reeling from the flashback. But I think I just remembered who I used to be. Zara looked at her with concern. And who was that? Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I was one of them, she said. I was the one who helped create this nightmare. And with that realization, Lyra knew that her quest for knowledge had just taken a dark and dangerous turn. She was no longer just a victim. She was also a perpetrator. And she had to find a way to atone for her sins. The ruins of the research facility groaned around them as Lyra clutched her head, cybernetic implants flickering erratically. Jax dragged her backward through collapsing tunnels, Zara covering their retreat with precise plasma shots at falling debris. Jax, yelling over the rumble, we need to get to the surface before this whole place becomes our tomb. Lyra, voice strained, the archives, they're still active in my neural pathways. I can feel the data. A steel beam crashed inches from them. Zara grabbed Lyra's arm, her green eyes sharp. Zara, save the existential crisis for when we're not buried alive, Sparkles. They emerged into the toxic haze of Port Azure's industrial zone, coughing. Lyra collapsed against a corroded pipeline, her breathing ragged. Faint blue light pulsed beneath her skin where implants snaked across her collarbone. Jax, checking her vitals, your system's overloading. Those memory unlocks are frying your circuits. Lyra, weak laugh, you've seen the files. I helped build those circuits. Designed the torture chambers. My father's. Her voice broke. The holographic flashback from the facility replayed in jagged fragments, Rexus's cold eyes, the screams of test subjects, her own hands coding lethal protocols. Zara, scanning the horizon, save the guilt trip. Imperial drones are sweeping Sector 9. Varkosa's personal insignia on their hulls. Jack stiffened. Commander Varkos, the Empire's reclamation specialist, had a reputation for melting cities to ash to retrieve single targets. Jax, how long? Zara, 8 minutes. Maybe 9 if they stop to incinerate a slum for fun. The safe house. They fled to Zara's underground lab, hidden beneath a brothel in the red light district. Holoscreens flickered with stolen Imperial data as Zara rigged a neural stabilizer from scavenged parts. Zara, adjusting electrodes on Lyra's temples, this'll hurt. A lot. Lyra, clenching jaw, do it. Energy crackled. Lyra's back arched as fragmented memories surged. Rexus demonstrating a gravity core prototype, entire planets rendered to dust in simulations. Her own voice, younger, pleading, "Father, this isn't ethical." Varkos, decades younger, accepting a data drive from Rexus with a smirk. When the procedure ended, Lyra vomited black fluid, nanite coolant. Jax, gripping her shoulder, "What did you see?" Lyra, hoarse, "Varkos wasn't just some enforcer. He funded my father's work. The gravity tech, it's not just a weapon. It's a key." Zara froze. "Zara, to what?" Lyra, "Something buried deeper than the facility. A vault." Rexus called it the cradle. Varkos closes in. Across Port Azure, Commander Varkos stood aboard his dreadnought, Iron Resolve, reviewing attack patterns. His augmented eye glowed crimson as Lyra's updated biometrics flashed on screen. "Varkos, to subordinates, bring me the Etherean alive. Incinerate the rest." His fleet descended, ion cannons carving through the upper districts. Civilians fled as entire blocks vaporized. The betrayal. Back at the lab, Zara quietly transmitted coordinates to an unknown receiver. Jax, noticing, "Who are you contacting?" Zara, too quickly, "A buyer for the cradle data. Credits we'll need." Lyra's gaze sharpened. She'd seen Zara's tells in the facility archives, how her fingers twitched when lying. Lyra, standing shakily, "You're selling us out." Jax, raising his rifle, "Zara." The broker sighed, pressing a button. Force field slammed down, trapping Jax. Zara, "Sentimentality's bad for business, Jax. Varkos pays triple for living weapons, and their handlers." Lyra lunged, but her failing implant sparked, dropping her to her knees. Zara aimed a pulse pistol. "Zara, don't worry. He wants you functional." The escape. Jax smashed his forehead against the force field controls, overloading them through sheer brute force. Alarms blared as he tackled Zara. Jax, snarling, "You sold the entire Undercity for credits?" Lyra crawled to a terminal, fingers flying across keys. The lab's fusion reactor began overloading. Lyra, to Jax, "Go. I'll hold them off." Jax, "Not a chance," he grabbed her, dragging her toward a service tunnel as Zara scrambled for her pistol. The reactor detonated, engulfing the lab. The pair barely escaped into sewage tunnels as Varkos's dropships landed above. Revelation in the dark. Hours later, hidden in a derelict freighter's hull, Lyra examined her flickering implants. "Lyra, the cradle's coordinates, I have them. It's on Nexus Prime." Jax bandaged a plasma burn on his arm, silent. Lyra, softer, "You should leave. This is my." Jax, "Finish that sentence, and I'll weld your mouth shut." He tossed her a stolen energy cell. "We're getting to that vault. You're gonna fix your systems, then we're burning the Empire's whole damn legacy." Lyra stared at him. Jax, grinning, "What? Thought I'd let some backstabbing broker and a genocidal commander derail my payday?" For the first time since her awakening, Lyra laughed, a real, unguarded sound. "Lyra, you're terrible at self-preservation." Jax, activating the freighter's engines, "You're just figuring that out." As the ship lifted into orbit, neither noticed the tracking beacon Zara had slipped into their supplies, pulsing quietly.